Alright, so I built a custom version of the Pavo Pico. I'm calling this the Pavo Ultralight. And I made it from basically the frame kit and motors and the all-in-one flight controller board. So you can buy them separately, or you can buy them all pre-built like this, where they all come together. The motors are already connected and screwed onto the frame, and they'll come like this. So that's like about a little over $100 for this. Includes prop guards, of course. Just doesn't have the O3 air unit, and then you just stick it in there. But I wanted to do a custom build, and with a naked O3, as you can see, I stripped it down, got rid of, you know, a lot of the metal, and then I used a shorter video cable that I picked up from SpeedyBee. And I got the weight down. I'll show you all the weight here in a second. One thing to note is that if you do build this from parts, if you get the frame kit, the motors, and the flight controller separately, the screws that come with the motors are too long for the frame kit. So they'll end up going into the PCB where the motor wires are. So you'll have to acquire shorter screws from somewhere. Luckily I had some lying around and I was able to finish this build. But yeah, I did inform BetaFP about this. Maybe they'll fix that. They should include the shorter screws with the frame kit. Obviously they have screws included with the motors, but they're probably for something a lot thicker in terms of the frame that they're being mounted on. Alternatively, you could probably maybe stick some TPU under here or something like that for the longer screw, but not really ideal. So I mainly built this to be as light as possible, so I stripped off everything that I basically didn't need. So it's a bare minimum build to get the weight down as much as possible. And so, for example, the all-in-one flight controller board comes with these little motor plugs. I believe now they sell this as a light versus classic. If you get the classic, it comes with the motor plugs soldered on already. If you get the light version, it comes with the motor plugs separately, and then you can solder it on separately. I also did not install the capacitor on mine because it's just 2S. So you could put that on there if you want, but I didn't feel like I wanted the extra weight. Additionally, when I built mine, I did not use that extra nut that goes between the plate and the dampener between the flight controller board, so you get the flight controller board closer to the carbon plate. So you can see here that you're supposed to put this nut here between the carbon plate and the flight controller board, and that's because they have these plugs for the motor wires and the motor wire plugs. And since I'm not using that, I decided not to put that nut on to save a little bit of extra weight. Yeah, so I ended up with a bunch of extra nuts here that I didn't use. I also used a different XT30 here, and I soldered on some 20 gauge wire instead of 18 gauge wire. That's what comes with the all-in-one flight controller board. So, and also kind of put a little bend here in the plug so that it can kind of bend down, because the battery will be in here and it kind of bends up and around. So just kind of basically I did this so it doesn't actually rest on the prop guard. Again, I did only use 2 of the 3 screws here for the motors. Seems to be okay. I haven't had any issues yet. But yeah, I don't know if it makes that much of a difference. You know, losing 4 screws is probably like maybe 0.4 of a gram. Anyway, putting this together the way I did here with no motor plugs at all and soldering the motor wires directly to the flight controller board. The difference between this and then the one that comes pre-built is roughly 2 grams, maybe 3 grams. It's not a huge difference, but of course I'm trying to save as much weight as possible. And then there's a lot of different ways you can strip down the O3 air unit. I elected to just remove the outer casing. I did not remove any of the cans that cover these RF shields here. They're all over the place. There's one here. There's obviously a big one here that the SD card sits on, and then there's one on top of this board here and underneath this board. If you remove all of the RF shielding, you can save another, I think, roughly 5 more grams. But I did this here, and I've got this down to like 22 grams. And I did remove the back case on the camera module, and I put a shorter 60mm cable in here. This is from SpeedyBee, and that seems to be okay. The difference between the back case with the longer cable and the shorter cable is about 3 grams. So it's 3.5 grams for this and 0.5 gram for just the cable. So you save weight there. And of course, it doesn't, the O3 air unit stripped down doesn't really fit in this space now. So I use some dental floss to kind of hold it into place and make sure that it does not touch the carbon plate. And so in terms of the Jello, what I'm finding the biggest, most important factor in terms of whether you get Jello or not is how tight or loose that screw is that comes from underneath here and goes into this cage. And you don't want it too loose and you don't want it too tight. It's kind of like Goldilocks principle. It has to be just right. It has to allow a little bit of movement, but not too much movement. And if it's too restricted, if it's like squished down too much, it's too tight, then you get actually more Jello that way versus if it's too loose. So it's almost better to be too loose than too tight. And you want to make sure it's even. You don't want like one side being more loose than the other. So that's how the vibration is isolated. Hopefully this can be improved somehow to isolate the vibrations even more. I'm not sure what else can be done, but yeah, basically when you get these screws and you put them in here, so it should look like that, and you should have a screw long enough where you have about that much thread that can go into the plastic part for the cage. If it's too short, then you've gotten the wrong screws, and you need to contact BFPB and have them send you the right ones, because they need to be long enough to grip the cage enough to hold it in place and make so it's secure and doesn't vibrate, but not too short where you're basically basically eliminating the vibration dampening properties of these rubber grommets here. That's what you want to avoid. That, I find, is the single most important factor in whether or not you're going to get Jello or not. Yeah, it's a very delicate balance to find the exact right points. You're going to be kind of fiddling with that a little bit, making it tighter, making it looser, to finally find the point where there's no Jello. So that, I find, is the most important factor. Now, there was another person that commented that the props are pretty important. I think that's probably like a fairly minor, maybe secondary factor, because it doesn't really matter which props you put on here, whether it's the bi-bladed or the tri-bladed. They're both going to vibrate like crazy, because this is just a tiny little thing, and these motors are really small. I think there is some variability in the amount of vibrations you get on each prop set. I found that it doesn't really matter if it's 2-bladed or 3-bladed. It kind of just matters on the batch of the prop you have. What I like to do is actually power this up and then spin each motor individually with the prop on in Betaflight, and then listen to what it sounds like. And then you can tell which ones are kind of unbalanced. They just kind of sound like they don't sound smooth. So then you just switch out those props. And so what I suggest is buying lots of props, and then you can test each one individually and then spin them up in Betaflight with the prop on and listen to what it sounds like. And then you can tell which one sounds good and which ones sound terrible. I didn't record that, and the sound, it doesn't really come through on the microphone. You just have to listen to it, and you'll be able to tell, like, okay, this one sounds pretty rough, or this one sounds really smooth. And of course you want to swap out the rough ones and get rid of those, and then find all the smooth ones. And so I bought like 10, 20? Well, I bought a lot of props, a shitload of props, and tested a lot of them. I found that roughly a quarter of them I ended up throwing away because they really were unbalanced. And so you'll get like a set of 4, and maybe like, all 4 of them will be good, or maybe like 1 or 2 might be no good. So you have to just test them individually, I found, and then obviously get rid of the ones that sound unbalanced or sound weird, and the ones that sound smooth, keep those around. And of course, when you crash these and bend the prop, then of course you gotta get rid of it, because once it's bent, it's pretty much toast at that point. You want to just get rid of those props and find good ones. All right, so let me just go ahead and show you the weight difference here. So this is basically the standard Pavo Pico, and it's coming in at roughly 71 grams. And this is the ultralight version with a naked O3, and now we're coming in at 57 grams. So, roughly, looks like what's that, 14 gram reduction in weight, which is pretty good. And just to let you see here, with the 2S450 stock battery, it's coming in about 99 grams for the standard one, and then with the ultralight. We're coming in at about 85.5 grams. Now I did do this mod here where you can use two of these 1S550s and put them in series with this little serial XD30 adapter I made. And then the weight here is a little bit more, it's 87.7 grams. And these batteries do fit perfectly in that tray, by the way, and they don't come out. And you do get a roughly 30-second improvement in flight time over the 2S450 for a little bit of extra weight. Now, a lot of people say that the PID tune on this is a really important factor in whether you get jello or not, and I found that after trying about, about 10 different PID tunes on both of these, it almost doesn't matter whether you get jello or not. It will matter, of course, how it performs, how it feels. That'll matter, but whether the vibrations will come through in the jello, that's not as much of a factor as whether or not that screw is too tight here for what's mounting the cage. So keep that in mind. There's a lot of different tunes out there. You say, oh, this one will get rid of the jello, that one will get rid of the jello. That's not a factor in my opinion. It's whether or not that screw is too tight or not. That's the most important factor. And obviously, for feel and flight performance, etc., you probably want to find a good PID tune. There's a whole bunch of them out there already. I found that going from D-Shot 600 to 300 seems to help a little bit. Also, the firmware on some of the flight controller boards, some of them seem to come with 24 kilohertz. BlueJay firmware said at 48, although on the product page it says it should come with 48 kilohertz. So I think some of the older batches, the initial batches came out with 24 kilohertz BlueJay firmware, but I think more of the recent ones have 48 kilohertz. But if you go to the product page for the flight controller board, they'll tell you, it'll send you to the GitHub page where you can download 19.2 48 kilohertz to make sure you get that one, and then that's the one that I would recommend putting on here. Yeah, I've heard some people that said that they were somehow got the 24 kilohertz firmware that did not fly as well as the 48 kilohertz, and I've heard some mixed information regarding the 96 kilohertz. On the product page it says they don't recommend it. It's not going to be good for the flight controller for whatever reason, and some people say it's good and some people say it didn't work, like the motors didn't spin up. So I don't really know. I didn't try that myself, but I've heard some kind of mixed stories about the 96 kilohertz, but the 48 kilohertz seems to work pretty well for me. Anyway, I just wanted to give you an update on what's going on with the Pavo Pico here, the ultralight version. I like this a lot, and I've been getting some good footage, and I will continue to use it and give you updates as needed. But that's where kind of things stand right now. I'm still kind of playing around with it. I got lots of things I could do with this and more experiments, but just giving you an update on where things stand right now. These are, as far as I know, were sold out for a while. I'm not sure if they're back in stock in terms of the plug and play to get the O3 air unit, but you can still buy the parts individually. Just you need to find the shorter screws for the motors. Hopefully BFP will fix that soon. Alright, that's going to cover for this video. If you enjoyed the video, please give the video a thumbs up, really appreciate it. And if you want some more videos like this, please consider subscribing. It will really help out the channel. That'll do it for now. Talk to you guys in the next one.